And let's record it here onto this computer. Okay, good evening, everybody. Let's get on speaker view so that we're not watching Adam and Maggie eat dinner. Let's see. We'll get all these complications, here and there, little complications. We're getting there. Okay, so now speaker view should really be on me. Unmute, ask to unmute. Mute, ask to unmute. And still I see Erwin on the screen. I'm not sure why that is. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, we should be able to start now, even though my screen says Erwin on it for some reason. I don't know why that is. It seems to think that Erwin is the one who's speaking, which is not correct, but that's fine. All right, we've got our participants. Okay, that's fine. If only I could see myself. Spotlight. There we go. Now you can see me. I can see you. Wonderful. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay. Sorry for the delay here. Just getting all my settings right. Preferences, video, FaceTime, HD. There we go. All right, much clearer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the scene of the crime. Indeed, a crime has been committed. A crime of mistaken identity. Unfortunately, our victim has been accused of many heinous crimes, even though it's not at all clear that he did any of them. So we're here to try to set that a little bit more right. Our victim this evening is known as Esau, brother of Jacob, son of Isaac and Rebekah. He is our victim. Now, we all know who Esau is. Esau is the enemy of Jacob, and Esau hates Jacob, and Esau wanted to kill Jacob, and Esau is he's a bad guy all around. He's a terrible, terrible guy. Read through any rabbinic writings, and they will not hesitate to share with you how terrible he is. And as a matter of fact, we're going to see that in the Bible, he is depicted later in the Bible as being a pretty bad guy. So we're not going to have too much mercy on him, but we do want to get the story straight and find out why it is that Esau is constantly in rabbinic writing being portrayed as this terrible guy when we read through the story, it does not appear to be so. So I'm going to ask you to suspend all that you know about Jacob and Esau, and we're going to read the story together, right? We're going to read the story, and as we read through the story, we're going to keep asking ourselves, what do we think of this guy Esau? What is this guy Esau? How does he strike us? All right. Let's take a look at the text. Okay, we're going to share. We're going to go here. Here is where it all begins. V'ele toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham oldest Yitzchak. Story of Isaac, Abraham, son of Abraham. Abraham got Yitzchak. Yitzchak, they don't have children, and then his wife becomes pregnant. Here we are in verse 22. But the children struggled in her womb, and she said, if so, why do I exist? She went to inquire of the Lord. So Rebekah becomes pregnant, and she has two children, and they're struggling in the womb. Now, listen, babies move around. Kids move around, and twins move around probably 2.5 times as much. Not that I would know. But apparently here, there's more of a struggle going on, and so she's told what's going on. And the Lord answered her, saying, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 separate people shall issue forth from your body. 1 people shall be mightier than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. What's the answer? You got these 2 kids fighting in your womb. You know why they're fighting? They're fighting because they're 2 nations, and they're struggling with each other for ascendancy. The future has been predicted. Okay, So she gives birth. When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first one emerged red like a hairy mantle all over, so they named him Esau. What the name Esau has to do with hairy mantle is not so clear, although Rashi attempts to explain it with a pun, but he can't do better than that. And afterwards, then his brother emerged holding on to the heel of Esau, so they named him Jacob. Okay, so what do we know about Esau right now? All we know about him is that he's red with a hairy mantle. Nothing to condemn him for. Although we'll see that the rabbis, they managed to condemn him for that too a little bit. We'll see. Okay. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Okay? Esau likes to go out and hunt. Jacob likes to stay home and play video games. Isaac favored Esau because he had taste for game, but Rebekah favored Jacob. Hard to criticize somebody for having a taste for game. Again, I don't see anything here to be critical of. Now, once when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the open famished. He's very, very hungry. So Esau says to Jacob, give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I am famished. Which, according to the text, is why he was named Edom. Edom is a pun on the words ha'adom, ha'adom, that red stuff. So Esau is identified as Edom. So Jacob said, right now he's hungry, so he wants some food. He's famished. Hard to criticize him. Okay. Jacob says, first sell me your birthright. Esau says, I'm at the point of death. So what is my use? So what use is my birthright to me? But Jacob said, swear to me first. So he swore to him and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright. So it would appear here that Esau basically had the birthright and he gave it away because he didn't really care, because he's going to die anyway. Except that doesn't really, not exactly what the verse says. So let's just take one careful look at a particular word here. Vayivez Esau es habachora. The word vayivez means to squander. Doesn't mean to spurn. It means to squander. So Esau squandered the first. All right. He made a bad deal. What happened? He was hangry, right? He was hangry. He was desperate. He came back. He wanted the food. And he's like, listen, I'm going to drop dead if you don't feed me. So he sold his birthright. Now, right now, I just don't have a lot to complain about Esau. I just don't have a lot to complain about. Now, we'll see how the rabbis read in various lines, but so far, really not a lot to complain about. Okay. Let's go to the continuation, I should say, of the story. So we have the stealing of the blessings, so to speak. We explained last week that they weren't stolen at all, but you have to go back to last week's class for that. So let's see what we have. So Isaac says to Esau, go, I want to bless you. Go out, hunt something for me and bring it back. Okay, so meanwhile, Rebekah and Jacob scheme and Isaac gives the blessings to Jacob. And now Esau comes back. He went to his father and he said, Father, and he said, Hineni, yes. Which of my sons are you? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau. I'm sorry, this is the Jacob part. We want the Esau part. Sorry, here we go. Now, no sooner had Jacob left the presence of his father Isaac, after Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, that his brother Esau came back from his hunt. He too prepared a dish and brought it to his father, and he said to his father, let my father sit up and eat of his son's game, so that you may give me your innermost blessing. Hard to criticize Esau for this sentence. He's just repeating what Isaac told him earlier. His father said to Isaac, who are you? And he said, I am your son Esau, the firstborn. Isaac was seized with violent trembling. Who was it then? He demanded and hunted game and brought it to me. Moreover, I ate of it before you came, and I blessed it. Now he must remain blessed. When Esau heard his father's words, he burst into wild and bitter sobbing. And he said to his father, bless me too, father. But he answered, your brother came with God and took away your blessing. Esau said, was he then named Jacob that he might supplant me these two times? First, he took away my birthright, and now he's taken away my blessing. And he added, have you not reserved the blessing for me? Isaac answers, saying to Esau, but I made a master over you. Skip down a little bit. Have you one blessing, father? Father, bless me as well. Bless me too, father. Esau wept. So Isaac gives him a blessing. Okay. Not a lot to criticize Esau for here. let's go now. Now Esau harbored a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing which his father had given him. And Esau said to himself, let but the mourning period of my father come, and I will kill my brother Jacob. This is not a nice thing. This is not a good thing. There's clearly room to criticize Esau about the fact that, angered over the fact that essentially the essence of the inheritance of Isaac is going to pass to Jacob and not to him. He wants to kill his brother. No one's saying this is a good thing. It's reflective of a flaw in character, I'm sure. But more than that, we can't say. Okay. Now, a little more Esau. Just a little more. This week's Torah portion is time for the reunion. So, looking up, Jacob saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. Okay. Esau comes for a conflict. He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids. Okay, details. He went on ahead and bowed low to the ground 7 times till he was near his brother. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, and falling on his neck, he kissed him and wept. Oh, the reunion of the brothers. Looking about, he saw the women and children. He asks who they are, and they talk. And now he asks, what do you mean by all this company which I have met? Esau wants to know who all these gifts were. So Jacob answers, to gain my Lord's favor. Esau says, I have enough, my brother. Let what you have remain yours. It's okay. Right, nice thing. You want to give me a gift? You want to give me a gift? Not necessary. You don't have to give me the gift. So he pushes on the gift. Jacob pushes the gift on to Esau, and he accepts them. And then Esau says, and Esau said, let us start on our journey, and I will proceed at your pace. And Jacob says, no, that's not going to really work out because I can't rush. Then Esau said, let me assign some of the men who are with me. But he said, oh, no, my Lord is too kind to me. So Esau started back on that day on his way to Seir. And the next time we meet Esau, we don't meet him again. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it for Esau. So let's ask ourselves, as I stop to share the screen for a moment. Okay, let's talk about this terrible guy, Esau. My impression would be, if I were to remove somehow my rabbinic midrashic glasses, my impression would be that, listen, Esau's an out, he likes to run around outside, and he likes to hunt, and which is not in and of itself necessarily something to criticize, although the rabbis will criticize that, of course, as well. But I go out and he hunts. His father likes him. He wanted the blessings. He seemed very respectful to his father. As a matter of fact, the rabbis praise the fact that the rabbis basically say Esau is a model of filial commitment to his parents. He is held up very, very high for this. Then let's see what happens. So he comes in. Let's remember now, he came into the field. He comes in from the field, and Jacob takes advantage of the fact that he's starving. And then later on, when he goes out to the field, Jacob pulls a trick and steals, well, not steals, but he gets the blessing from him. Okay. Esau's reaction to Jacob at the beginning when they have this exchange where Esau's hungry, and Jacob wants to give him food. Jacob wants to make a deal with him. It's hard to criticize Esau here, unless you want to read some of the words a little bit differently than they're probably intended. It's very, very, which the rabbis do, of course, all the time. It's very, very hard to criticize Esau's behavior. But the only thing you can criticize Esau for is he wanted to kill his brother because his brother basically took advantage of him twice. I'm not saying this is a good thing, right? When they have the reunion finally, right? So Esau's all angry. And yet when they meet up, his heart melts and he rushes and he hugs him and he kisses him. And he offers him to escort him, and he offers him to leave some men behind. I like this guy. By and large, I like this guy. Because at the end of the day, for all his murderous intentions, he doesn't kill Jacob. His heart melts. What are we so upset about? What is it about Esau that the rabbis just can't seem to make any peace with? Hold on a second, please. Okay, we're back. The history of the Jewish people dates back thousands and thousands of years. And over those thousands of years, we've had many neighbors and maybe many enemies. When we first arrived in the land of Israel, you had the Canaanites who were living there, as well as the other local nations. Then there were various conquerors who came. Thank you, dear. There were various conquerors who came. And throughout history, the Jewish people had to deal with a number of enemies they've had to deal with. This is natural, obviously, right? Very often it's contentious between nations. And the Jewish people have been no exception. The Jewish people had a long-standing relationship going back to Jacob and Esau. They have a long-standing relationship with the nation of Edom. Edom is the nation that Esau conquers and lives in. He settles in. He settles in Edom. They had taken it over from the Chori, the Horites. Details for another time. Okay, so the Jewish people. The Jewish people have to have relations with their neighbors. Neighbors who, by the way, neighbors whose stories are in their Bible. Ammon, Moab, Edom, and others. So the founder of the nation was Edom. Now, in the course, one of the nations I had to deal with was Edom, which were descendants of Esau. And in fact, they had a very, very difficult relationship with Edom. I'm going to share with you now an entire book. We're going to read an entire book of the Bible about Esau and Jacob. Not to worry, the book is 21 verses long, the whole book. It's the book of Obadiah. Let's take a look at the book of Obadiah, because we're going to find out that there's, for very good reason, some tremendous enmity to start with. There's tremendous enmity with Edom, between Israel and Edom, because of something Edom does. And let's take a look. So let's share the screen again. Wow, the control bar is blocking my access to the window I want. So we will reduce. That did not help. How do I get to my window? Got to be a way to move the control bar then. Let's see. Yes, there is. I learned something new. Obadiah, chapter 1. We're going to read the whole book from chapter 1 to chapter 1. Okay, here we go. Let me move this bar again. Now it's in the way. Technology. Let's make this larger so it's easier to read. The prophecy of Obadiah. We have received tidings from the Lord, and an envoy has been sent out among the nations. Up, let us rise against her for battle. Thus said my Lord God concerning Edom, I will make you least among nations. You shall be most despised. Your arrogant heart has seduced you. You who dwell in clefts of the rock, in your lofty abode, you think in your heart, who can pull me down to earth? Their primary living space, by the way, were the mountains of what we would call southern Jordan, northern Saudi Arabia. So they're up in the mountains. Should you nest as high as the eagle? Should your eyrie be lodged among the stars? Even from there I will pull you down, declares the Lord. If thieves were to come to you, marauders by night, they would steal no more than they needed. If vintagers came to you, they would surely leave some gleanings. How utterly you are destroyed. How thoroughly rifled is Esau, how ransacked his hordes. All your allies turned you back at the frontier. Your own confederates have duped and overcome you. Those who ate your bread had planted snares under you. He, meaning Esau, is bereft of understanding. This is something they like to do in general. Esau is dumb. Let's not go there right now. In that day, declares the Lord, I will make the wise vanish from Edom, understanding from Esau's mount, Esau's mountain. Your warriors shall lose heart, O Teman. Let's not get into it now. And not a man on Esau's mount shall survive the slaughter. For the outrage of your brother Jacob, disgrace shall engulf you, and you shall perish forever. What is the outrage? And now we must pay very, very careful to the next several verses, careful attention. On that day when you stood aloof, when aliens carried off his goods, Jacob's goods, when foreigners entered Jacob's gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were as one of them. How could you gaze with glee on your brother that day, on his day of calamity? How could you gloat over the people of Judah on that day of ruin? How could you loudly jeer on a day of anguish? How could you enter the gate of my people on its day of disaster, gaze in glee with the others on its misfortune, on its day of disaster, and lay hands on its wealth on its day of disaster? How could you stand at the passes to cut down its fugitives? How could you betray those who fled on that day of anguish? As you did, so it shall be done to you. Okay. And by the way, when we get to the end, we are told, the liberator shall march up on Mount Zion to wreak judgment on Mount Esau, and dominion shall be the Lord's. Okay. What this book has just informed us is that at the destruction of the first temple, Edom was there. Edom allied itself with the people who were attacking Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Edom allied themselves. They were in Jerusalem. They entered the temple. They plundered, and they cut off the escape for fugitives. That's going to create a great deal of enmity between the Jewish people and Edom. There we go, switch my view. Between the Jewish people and Edom. It's going to create tremendous, tremendous enmity. As a matter of fact, there's a verse somewhere else in the Bible where God basically says, I hate Esau. I hate them. Now, we know why. It's not confusing. It's not hard to see why, right? If someone who is supposed to be your brother and your ally betrays you, comes into your temple, takes your goods, and causes your people to be killed, you're going to hate that nation. You're going to have a lot of enmity towards that nation. So, even though when we read the initial story of Esau, he seems to be an okay guy with a flaw here or there, but basically an okay guy. Now, the rabbis are like, we don't like Edom, and we don't like Esau. So we're going to go back and we are going to reread into this story many, many bad things about Esau. I'm going to share with you a selection of those things. I have to read it off this paper here. A selection of the elements of the vicious character of Esau. Okay. Here we go. According to the Pesik Rabbis, all of the places I'm going to quote are rabbinic midrashic collections. Esau insulted women and committed murder. His shameful conduct brought on the death of his grandfather Abraham. Well, that's not going to make him sound good. Here's another story. So Esau went out hunting one day, and he happens upon Nimrod. Now, Nimrod was a great king who, according to legend, wore special garments, which he had actually received, somehow or other been passed down from Adam. Don't know. He had these special garments that he would wear so that wild animals would just stand still for him and he could kill them, which made him a very great hunter. This is all midrash. None of this is text. The fact that he was a great hunter is actually text, but the rest of it is midrash. All right, so Esau kills him and steals his garments. As a matter of fact, says the midrash, those are the garments which the Bigdei Hachamudot, Bigdei Banav Hachamudot, those are the garments which Rebecca dresses Jacob when he goes to fool Isaac. Right, so he's a murderer. He killed Nimrod, the great king Nimrod, and he stole his garment. We have more. According to Bereshis Rabbah, blasphemous speeches. Esau would give speeches blaspheming against God. Denial of immortality. We've got more. We've got much more, actually. I'll try to limit it. So we're told that Yitzchak's eyes, he couldn't see. He couldn't see. The rabbis blame Esau for that. Why couldn't he see? Because Esau had wives who were idolatrous, who offered up idolatrous offerings, and the smoke got into Isaac's eyes, and it made it hard for him to see. Okay. Yay, nay, nay. But the goal of these statements is all to paint Esau in as poor of a light as possible. Here's one that's actually put into the text of the Torah. And I say that with caution. but I want you to see this one. So I'm going to share shortly. I'm going to share the screen with you again, just to share it with you. There it is. Okay, let me share the screen with you now. Did I do that already? You're not looking at my screen. Are you looking at my screen? Somebody nod. Are you looking at text or me? You. That's what I was afraid of. So let's go back to Zoom. All right, let's share the screen. We got it now. We got it now. So they go to meet Esau and Jacob. They go to meet. Esau ran to greet him. He embraced him, falling on his neck. He kissed him and they wept. Oh, beautiful. Oh, the reunion, the crying on the shoulders. I want to point out something to you in the Hebrew text. You don't have to know a word or a letter of Hebrew to see this. You see what I'm circling? See the dots above every letter? Those dots are actually found in the Torah text. In the Torah text, this word, vayishakehu, and he kissed him, has dots on top of it. And the rabbis put it there. It's clear that the rabbis put the dots. The Talmud makes it clear that the rabbis added those dots in. The question is, why did they add those dots in? What are they trying to tell you about the kiss? According to some rabbis, it's telling you that they were emphasizing that it was sincere. But according to most opinions, what they're trying to tell you is that when he fell on his neck and he kissed him, he was trying to bite him and kill him. I'm not saying he was a vampire. I'm just telling you that according to them, they put those dots there to emphasize that Esau tried to kill Jacob at this reunion. Now, that's just not in the text. But when you plunder and raid my city and side with my enemies and kill my fugitives, who are running away, we're going to get you back in the text anyway. It's like how do rabbis get revenge? They make speeches and write things, right? Okay, so that's the story with Vayishakehu, and he kissed him. There happen to be numerous other examples. I don't want to belabor the point too much because now we have to shift gears a little bit. Okay, so who's Esau? Esau is Edom. We know who Edom is. They're a specific kingdom in a specific location. Wonderful. Until we get to the Second Temple, late in the Second Temple period, and beginning afterwards. So we're now in the Common Era. Previously, let me just backtrack. The temple was destroyed in 586 before the Common Era. Okay. We're now going to fast forward to the Jews under the occupation of Rome. We're going to say that we're about at the beginning of the Common Era, somewhere between the beginning of the Common Era and the end of the first century of the Common Era. So we have, So at that period, we have a new identification for Esau. Esau and Edom, who had been a specific people located in a specific place, are about to be transmuted into Rome and Christianity. Now, how they got to Roman Christianity, we're going to talk about in a minute. But what happens is that the rabbis intentionally conflate Rome and Christianity with Edom and Esau. The question is why? Why did they do that? So the first and most simple reason is because, listen, let me tell you what happens on Shabbos, folks. Shabbos morning, I have something I want to talk about. So what do? I find something in the text and it's a hook in the text, and then I can talk about what I want to talk about. I have a former colleague of mine who gave the following analogy. He said that when he prepares a speech, right, he looks through the text and he finds a target and then he shoots the arrow and hits the target. What do? He claimed. He said, you shoot the arrow and then you paint the target around it. Okay. Truth is, he's right. And as a matter of fact, I'm standing on good shoulders, tall shoulders, because it's exactly what the rabbis did all the time. The rabbis all the time shot the arrow. They had a certain point they wanted to make, and then they found a hook to put it on in the Bible. Now, this isn't literally everything the rabbis say. Sometimes the rabbis are interpreting the Bible or they're presenting Jewish law. It doesn't mean everything the rabbis say is a construction, but there's no question that the rabbis consistently construct something out of the Torah. They derived something out of the Torah that wasn't really stated there. Why? Because they have a polemical end. They want to make a certain type of point. Okay. The rabbis have a new enemy. Herod the Great, Rome, and eventually Christianity. They have a new enemy. They have a new source of aggravation. So what do they have to do? They've got to find someone to hang it on. And it wasn't hard. Why? Because they found in the murderous traits of Esau, they found someone who kind of fit the description of Rome. Close enough. So because the rabbis need someone to represent Rome, they take Edom, which had historically and even later in the Bible been described as a specific nation against whom we have a very, very legitimate and specific grudge. And what did they do instead? They shift and they say, no, that's Edom now. Now, how did they manage to do this? Does this come out of thin air? So one part of it is, as I said, is that there's some relationship. The Romans were bloodthirsty and power hungry. And so maybe you can stick it on Esau. I don't know, right? Not a lot of bloodthirsty characters in the book of Genesis. Esau is one of them. Okay, but there's more to it. Because, and I want to actually share with you now, if you want to take notes, I'll put the, you know what? I'll put the link. I'm going to share my screen just so I can copy the link. I want to put a link into the chat in case you want to look at this article later. But let's see, share screen. So this article from the Torah.com is called Esau, the Ancestor of Rome. Let me copy. Stop share, chat, and paste. So you can check out the article here, but let me summarize a lot of what it has to say. The early church fathers had a big challenge on their hands. They had a Messiah that they had to justify in Old Testament. And one of the ways that they justify it is by reinterpreting Old Testament stories from a Christological point of view. And in particular, they love the story of Jacob and Esau. Why? Because in the end, the stronger one will serve the younger one. The stronger one will serve the younger one. Who's the younger one? Christianity. Who's the stronger one? At that point, remember, in the first century of the Common Era, Christianity in first, second century, it's in its infancy, right? So the younger one is going to overtake the stronger one and the older one. They saw in the message from God to Rebekah about who her children are, and in the blessing of Isaac, they saw a way to reference that a younger brother is going to come along and overthrow the older brother, stronger brother. Christianity is going to supplant Judaism. Christianity is going to supplant Judaism. Now, in this analogy, interestingly, who is Esau and who is Jacob? Esau is the Jewish people and Jacob are the Christians, right? The younger one, that's Jacob, is going to overtake the more powerful older one, Esau. Christianity, the early church, were using this story and the personality of Yaakov and Esau, this conflict, they were using it to buttress their arguments. And they were referring to themselves as Jacob and the outmoded Jewish people as Esau. So what did the rabbis do? They turned it on its head. They said, what are you talking about? Christianity is Edom. Everybody knows that Christianity is Edom. Christianity is Edom. And what is it rooted in? It's rooted in the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire, we know, was Esau. We know that the Roman Empire was Edom. Look at their murderous behavior and the terrible things that they did in exiling the Jewish people and destroying the temple. Don't call us Esau. We're not Esau. You're Esau. What are you talking about? We're not Esau. You're Esau. We're not the murderous ones. You're the murderous ones. We're not the supplanters. You're the supplanters. What are you kidding? Calling us Edom? You're Edom. Christianity and Edom are the same thing. This polemic early on, remember, we're talking now about the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries of the Common Era, when a lot of these midrashim are being written, by the way, the early midrashim are being written, right? We have this polemical battle that goes on until Emperor Constantine makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. You have this constant polemical battle going on. Everybody wants to be Jacob, right? Jacob's the man. Jacob's blessed. Jacob's got the future. So the Christians claim they're Jacob. So what did the Jews do? They said, no, we're Jacob, like we've always said. And as a matter of fact, you are Esau. You are Edom. And not only are we going to say that you are that naive hunting guy who was really kind of a sweet, kind of not so bright guy, but we're going to go a lot further than that. We're going to paint you as being all of the negative traits that Esau ever had, or that we made up for him. Murderous intent and deceitful, not so bright, very, very, very militaristic, hunting, power. So the rabbis had a job to do, and they did their job well. Their job was to find something in the Bible that they could say to their people, especially remember, once Constantine makes Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire, the Jews have it really bad for a long time. And through it all, really to this day, but through it all, the rabbis said to the Jewish people, we're Jacob and the Christians are Esau, and Esau was a terrible guy and the Christians are terrible and they kill us and they persecute us, which actually was a pretty fair assessment up until modern times. So there's a lot of enmity there, and so they found somebody to stick the enmity on. Okay, let me stop. If anybody has questions, I have to see if I can get everybody on my screen at the same time. I think I can with the gallery view. So if anybody has any questions or comments, you can raise your hand and follow up. I'm looking on Facebook. If anybody on Facebook has a question, type it into the chat. I'm looking at the comments. But let's pause for a second, and then I have a couple of concluding comments to make. So if you have a comment, raise your hand and I will unmute you or invite you to unmute yourself. And the rabbi thinks to himself, this is what happens when you teach online. Nobody asks questions. That's okay. It's okay. I get it. You know, I've been thinking about this problem, by the way. I've discussed this with my colleagues also. They all have the same thing. I've talked to other rabbis about this also. And basically what we came down to is, listen, right, if I was asking a question in a class right now, the only person who'd see my face is the teacher. When you have to ask a question on Zoom, everybody sees your face. I don't know. I'm speculating. I'm sure years from now, somebody will come out with a study explaining this phenomenon of the absence of questions on Zoom, but that's okay. Let's move on. I want to make a couple of concluding comments. So, all right. So those of you who are familiar with our classes and been with our classes for a long time know that I can't resist making methodological points. There's a methodology here, and I want to emphasize that there's a methodology going on here. It has everything to do with what Midrash does. Midrash is a homiletical tool. Well, sorry, let me back up. The Midrash is composed of probably 3 different types of material. One type of material is halacha, Jewish law. Those are serious discussions about Jewish law. Jewish laws are derived. That's part of the Midrash. It's actually generally kept in a separate Midrashic work. When we talk about the Midrash, we're usually talking about the stories, or as Ginsburg liked to call it, legends of the Talmud. So, one of the jobs of Midrash is it explains how we derive laws from the verses that you see. You might be familiar with Rabbi Yishmael has the 13 rules of biblical exegesis. Okay, fine. That's one role. Another role of Midrash is to fill in details in the story. Right? The Torah story is very, very terse. Despite the fact that it seems like the Torah is a big book, the reality is that to take us from the time of creation till the end of Jacob's life only takes 50 chapters. This is not exactly War and Peace. So a lot of the details had to be left out to make the book readable. So in leaving out those details, sometimes the Midrash fills in story details. And those are factual items. And then there's the job of the Midrash is to fill in the blanks in stories. And I don't here just mean content, I mean reconstructing a story. When I say reconstructing, either of two things are happening. Either number one, they're trying to figure out what happened here. In the story itself, what happened here? So for example, the brothers sell Joseph, right? So the Midrash tries to figure out why it is that the brothers thought that they were justified in killing Joseph. So they're speculating on an explanation of the text. Very nice. The other thing that the rabbis will do with the Midrash is they'll shoot an arrow and paint a target. They've got lots of points that they want to make. They've got lots of lessons to get across, and they use the Midrash to do so. By the way, the Midrash, at least significant parts of the Midrash, are basically transcriptions of rabbi sermons on Shabbos morning. From back in the day, admittedly. They are, instead of giving you all the schmooze that the rabbi said, they gave you the core idea. But the rabbi had this opinion, and some other rabbi had that opinion. They're basically, especially Midrashim, if you're familiar with Midrash, where so-and-so began by saying, and he quotes a verse, that's basically the rabbis giving a sermon. So they collected all these sermons, and so we know what the rabbis, how they understood various verses or used various verses to make various points. Therefore, it is important also to realize that Midrashim have a very specific historical lens. A Midrash is the product of the rabbi who lived in a particular time and place. So, just as my sermon on this week's Torah portion would be radically different because of my historical context, would be radically different than a sermon given in Babylonia in the 3rd or 4th century of the Common Era, right? We would expect that. We'd expect those differences. That's because different people, different times, and therefore different perspectives. We see this, by the way, in explanations. We've talked about this many, many times. We see this in explanations of commentators on the Torah, where commentators on the Torah are struggling to work out the inefficiencies in a text or gaps in a story. So the commentators do the same thing. They are in a specific place at a specific time, and they take a specific approach. And now this is how we're going to understand why it is that we all grew up thinking Esau's a real criminal, terrible guy, when in fact the story doesn't seem to say that. Because the bottom line is that the rabbis, in telling over the story, have I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. I apologize. All right, so let's go back. So again, there are midrashim where the rabbis are. Let me just start again there, that last point, because I lost my train of thought, so I apologize. So you have, just as a different time and place, right? So therefore, if we had midrashim, if we had rabbinic midrash from the 4th century before the Common Era, or let's do better, the 6th century before the Common Era, the century in which Edom had cut off the refugees so that they could be killed, and they plundered Jerusalem, etc. If the rabbis are writing about the story of Esau, there's no question that they're going to say Esau is Edom. But if you're 700 years later, and you're in the 1st century of the Common Era, and you have these debates going on between the Jews and the early Christians, and you have the Romans on your hands, and then eventually you have the Romans and the Christians do the same thing, you're going to read into the story very, very differently. And by the way, because the times call for a different story. And ultimately now, right? So nowadays we see the same thing. So for example, there's a statement in the Talmud, halachahi, it's the way of the world. It's really what they're saying. Esau soneh Yaakov. Esau hates Yaakov. They say that that's the way of the world. Now, that's because once they create that representation of Esau representing Edom representing Christianity and the Romans, that's what you're going to get. We would not be driven to interpret the story this way. If we were reading the story the first time, I don't know that we would have been driven to interpret it this way, but, right, the Talmud says, Halacha Esav Sonius Yaakov. So what happens? The Iranians, they're threatening to bomb Israel. So the rabbi gets up on Shabbos morning and he says, it happens to be that it's in November or December and they're reading the story of Esau. And the rabbi says, Iran is Esau. Iran is Esau. Iran is Edom. By the way, who else do we see this with all the time? Amalek, a descendant of Esau, by the way, right? So every year when we get to the Torah portion that talks about Amalek and what they did to the Jewish people, the rabbi gets up and he tells you who this year's proxy is for Amalek. Why? Because the rabbis have a job to do, and that job is to bring forth relevant, contemporary interpretations of the text that will support the people in their struggles. That's exactly what they should do. And for that matter, I would submit to you that the reason why the Torah expresses itself in such a way where it's so open to interpretation is it's part of the genius of the Torah. Part of the genius of the Torah is that it leaves room to reconstruct the story in lots of different ways, because the reality over time is going to be that the Jewish people are going to have to reconstruct the story in lots of different ways. Right? If you tried to do this with, you opened up War and Peace and you tried to read in your life history, you could do that as well, I'm sure. But for the Jewish people, in terms of our own personal history, our national history, this is the way that it's done. So therefore, you have Edom and Esau, who in one generation or in many generations, but for centuries can be one group of people, a nation located in the Middle East, and all of a sudden they can become Christians all over the world. So this is part of what the rabbis do with Midrash. The goal of Midrash is the goal of the sermon I give on Shabbos, to take whatever it is that needs to be spoken about and dealt with and put it in a Torah framework. That's all the rabbis are doing with Esau and Edom. Unfortunately for Esau, he gets associated with some pretty rough characters. And so therefore, retroactively, he becomes a terrible, terrible guy. But when we read the story, it does not appear so clear-cut. One of the blessings of the Torah, and a blessing that we should hold on to at all times, is the fact that the Torah gives us an opportunity to make it, the Torah, relevant to our lives. The vagueness, the archetypal stories without getting into too much detail, all of that leaves room for interpretation. And that interpretation is essential because our lives are changing and our circumstances are changing. And therefore, our interpretation of the Torah and the way that we read things into the Torah changes from generation to generation. I welcome your questions or comments, although, of course, since we're online, I don't expect. Oh, yes, Esther Ingber. There we go. Hold on. Look at your screen, Esther. I think it's going to ask you to unmute.
Okay.
There we go. What's up, Esther?
So I have a question. There seems to be a common thread in our inheritance, in our tribe. It seems like almost in every family, there's always some kind of adverse relationship.
Sibling rivalries?
Between what?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Rivalries, jealousy, hatred. Does it go back to the beginning?
Part of human nature. One of the beauties of having these stories in the Torah is, besides the national relevance of speaking about Edom and Esau and Christianity, everything we talked about is on an individual level as well, of course. There are many lessons about parenting in the Torah. There are many lessons about just dealing with family dynamics. Listen, our forefathers had some crazy family dynamics to deal with.
Yeah, that's it.
But they're not the only ones, right? So
No.
Why should they be exempt?
Right.
Point well taken. Thank you. All right, folks. Let's see. Next week, this is Vayishlach, Vayeshev. Oh, the brothers sold Joseph, right? Tune in next week. Talk about it more. Karen has that knowing look on her face because she's heard this class. But tune in next week.
Dreamcoat.
But if you'd like in the interim, take a look at the story. Let me track down the chapter for you. Take a look at the story and ask yourself, who sold Jacob based on the reading of the text. Let me see if I can just find you that chapter quickly. Chapter and verse, just to make it easier on you. Hold on. Genesis, Torah portion, Vayeshev. Oh, Vayeshev. Vayeshev. Genesis 37. Is it only 37? Let me just make sure. Yeah, Genesis 37. Take a look at the story in Genesis 37. Read the story and just ask yourself, based on the story. We'll see more about this tomorrow. Oh, not tomorrow. Next time. I'm not teaching high school anymore. It's not tomorrow. It's next time. All right, folks. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you soon.
Good night.
Peace out.
Peace out.